Victim of leisure, consumer of amusement. Victim of leisure, consumer of amusement.
All right. So I when I pinged you on Twitter, I was most interested, in fact, talking about kind of oligopoly and kind of agglomeration in pop culture of the music
Yeah.
and movie variety. It seems that we're kind of just in this muck of just endless franchise updating. Of course, I'm using a loaded term there. Some people like this stuff. It's not a muck at all. It's more like a
Sure.
jacuzzi or something that you're splashing around in. But yeah. So what research have you done on that? It seems to basically support the loaded idea I just presented that this is bad and it is happening.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I might disagree a little bit with how bad that it is. Although I can come back to that in a second. So the state of the research anyway is I just got really interested in this idea, starting with movies, that like all movies are remakes and reboots and sequels and prequels and cinematic universe expansions. And the question that motivates so much of my research is, it seems like this thing has changed. Has it actually changed? And so I went back and looked at the top grossing movies going back all the way into the 70s, and coded each one. Like, is it part of a what film scholars call a multiplicity, which is just sequel, prequel, reboot, those things. And just looked at over time, like, has that changed? The percentage of movies in the top 20 that are somehow related to a movie that was made previously. And what I found was that, yes, that has changed. And what I thought was most interesting is that for this one, it hasn't been a steady change over time. That from the late 70s until the year 2000, it was about a quarter of movies in the top 20 were somehow related to a previous movie. And then in the year 2000, things just totally change. From that, it just every year more and more movies in the top 20 are sequels, prequels, remakes, reboots, etc. Until we get to today, where it's like pretty much it's like 100% with error variance. It's extremely rare now to have a movie that is a top-grossing movie that isn't related in any way to a previous movie that's made. It's a totally original screenplay or something like that, or even a movie that's like based on a book that itself is not like connected to a previous movie. So I was pretty surprised by that. And then I wondered, well, okay, that's movies. What about all other facets of popular culture? So what about television and books and video games and music? And I found similar results, not necessarily at the same time scale. So like in TV, this has happened as well, but it's been much more steady over time. Same thing for music. Books also had this huge takeoff in the mid 90s. And video games, pretty much from the beginning of the data that I have, which is the mid 90s, already the top grossing video games, most of them are somehow related to a previous video game. And now it is again, pretty much 100%. It's very rare for there to be a top selling video game that doesn't have some pre-existing connection to a previous video game. So that's kind of the state of the evidence that I found, at least for pop culture. And then in a later post, I expanded it to sort of everything else.
Yeah, I guess people might, I'm going to be contradicting myself here just for argument's sake. They might quibble with, well, what do you mean by, connected to something pre-existing, because
yeah.
they might go nuclear option and just say, well, everything basically traces back to either Shakespeare or some kind of a Canterbury's Tale or something from the ancient world, the Middle East, just
absolutely.
So I don't believe you mean that level of connected. I think it means something more. Yeah.
And this is a great point, because this was a decision I had to make when coding this data is like, okay, well, what counts as connected? Because I agree with you. Like, it's not that, there's only supposed to be like 6 versions of a story or something like that.
All heroes.
There's only so many. Yes, exactly. And so what does it mean to be connected to something previously? For me, that differs based on the type of popular culture we're talking about. So like for a movie, for me, it had to be like clearly a part of a movie franchise. So like everybody knows that all of the Jurassic Park movies are related to each other. And what that means is, if you watch a Jurassic Park movie, it's something dinosaurs, something goes wrong. And if a movie wasn't Jurassic Park, you wouldn't know those things about it. So that to me was a meaningful connection between movies. Similarly, like every James Bond movie is going to be about a spy and stuff is going to blow up and he's going to seduce a femme fatale. Like these seem to be like meaningful connections between some movies that aren't shared between other movies. But that's different in different facets of popular culture. So like television is a little bit similar. There, the way I coded it was, is this TV show in the top 30? Because that's the data that I had. Is it in the top 30 twice? Because TV, unlike movies, gets broadcast, can be broadcast multiple times in the same week. So you can have 2 new episodes of American Idol in the same week. And if both of them make it to the top 30, that means that American Idol has a bigger share of the top of the charts than something that's there only once. The other way a show can show up twice in the top 30 is if it's part of like a TV cinematic universe, which there aren't as many as there are in movies, but there are some, like the Chicago universe or CSI.
Yeah, that's one. It's not as prestigious as like the Breaking Bad turned Better Call Saul universe, but yes, Chicago. I remember, every facet of Chicago now it has a representation. All of the essential worker type Chicago's. There's Chicago for doctors, Chicago for police, Chicago law. I don't know how essential it is, but you get like.
Yeah, it's like they took a 5-year-old boy's playset and just made each of those things into a TV show and set it in Chicago. Which people love. I don't know. They're in the top 30, so I've never seen one myself, but people must like them. But that I thought was like a reasonable form of connection in TV. In music, it's different. In music, it's purely, are these songs by the same artist? And there too, you could say, artists sometimes just get handed songs. It's really the producer that matters more. But I'm thinking from the consumer side, when you listen to a Drake song, you know what that's going to sound like. Like every Drake song sounds more similar to each other than a Drake song and a Beethoven song. So I'm really thinking about this from the point of view of a consumer experience, especially in choosing what to listen to, that you know what you're going to get if you watch another James Bond movie or you listen to another Drake song or you watch another TV show in the Chicago universe. Similarly, in books, the way I coded it was just, is this book does one person have multiple books in the top 10? And this person who's in the top 10 with a book this year, were they also in the top 10 in the past 10 years? So there are book franchises, but really the thing I think that binds books together, at least from a consumer point of view, is the author. That if you buy a book by Danielle Steele, you know what it's going to be. If you know who Danielle Steele is, she's apparently one of the most prolific and best-selling authors of all time. But most people who haven't read a Danielle Steele book have no idea who she is. But anyway, she just churns out all these romance novels. And even though they aren't necessarily all set in the same romance universe, at least I don't think so, if you see Danielle Steele written in big letters on the top of that book, you know what it's going to be. And then in video games, I think the reasonable unit of analysis is the franchise where like if Mario's in the game, you know something about the game. Now Mario could be driving a go-kart, he could be playing golf, he could be playing tennis or trying to save the world. But it's going to have a certain style and flavor.
Trying to classify, the Mario universe. Let's say there's some golf game with an ensemble of Nintendo characters, and one of them is Mario. I mean, is that part of the Mario Mario video game universe?
Because he makes it's a good question. Yeah, it's fair, and it's up to interpretation. I only counted it if it was billed as a Mario game. So like Super Smash Brothers, for instance, gets counted as a franchise with other Super Smash Brothers games, rather than with Mario games. But really, I think a lot of these decisions might tilt things a little bit one way or the other, but the effects are so huge that it ends up not really mattering ultimately how you categorize these things, just because the shift has been so big.
Yeah, I was looking at there's a YouTube channel called Data is Beautiful, and they're constantly putting out these charts, these kind of animated things. Look at it seems to focus on movies and music and business as well, the kind of rise and fall of certain businesses over time and who has dominance. And I was watching top sci-fi film from 1968 to 2019, And 2001 dominated from 1968 right up to when Star Wars came out. And Star Wars immediately dislodged it. And then Star Wars stayed on top all the way up until Avatar came out. All the movies that came out, Back to the Future, all the sci-fi movies in the 80s and the 90s, none of it, even The Matrix, was not able to dislodge Star Wars. It took Avatar. And I think Avatar sat up top until very recently. And that's, I'm sort of pivoting to a different area, tangentially discussing how something like Avatar, which didn't really have the cultural impact people thought it would, the number suggests that it does. So
it's interesting that Avatar sold so well, and I wonder if part of it was really making a big push for 3D movies at the time. It was also the kind of movie that everybody could go see. That like you could go see Avatar with your dude friends, and it wouldn't be embarrassing. But you could also go see it, with your 7-year-old nephew, and that would also be a fine thing to do. And people have made this point about Marvel movies now, is that they're also like that, that anybody can go and watch them, and no one really has a principled objection to go watching it. Like no one can say, "Oh, that movie's not for me."
Right.
And so I wonder if that was part of it. Yeah.
Dark 30. It's not Zero Dark 30 where someone might say, "Hey, I think this is apologizing for the Bush torture regime." It's very broad, exclusive in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Nor is it Paranormal Activity, where people are like, "I don't want to see a horror movie." Nor is it a rom-com, which they don't even make blockbuster rom-coms anymore. But
that's very fascinating. That could be a whole discussion in itself. The decline of the rom-com and the blockbuster comedy to a lot of degrees that isn't animated, at least.
Yeah. And there, I mean, there are people who know more about this or think more about this than me, for sure. But I wonder if there's one of the factors is the same with this rise of the oligopoly, is that now there's much more competition for the lane in your life that is things that make you laugh. That if what you want to do is have a humorous experience, now most people turn to YouTube or TikTok or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's really hard for a feature-length film to hit that same density of laughs per minute. So in my other life, I teach and perform improv comedy and do some stand-up, and everybody's thinking, especially when you're writing a stand-up set, everybody's thinking about what is the density of laughs in this, that you need to cram in as many punchlines as you can per minute. It's not entirely true, but it's something that people are always thinking about. That is there a dead zone here? With a short video on YouTube, you can cram so many laughs in so quickly and then get out. But with a feature-length film, it's really hard to do that for 90 minutes, especially when you're also expected to like tell a story and you can't just end at any point. Whereas in a YouTube video, you have so much freedom, you can just nail it. And so why would you compete with a bunch of really good comedy content made mainly by amateurs for free on the internet? Like, why would you think people are going to pay you $14 to sit for 90 minutes to make them laugh? That's my theory. Anyway.
I think the last real blockbuster comedy might have been right around 2010, The Hangover or Bridesmaids.
Yeah.
There were, there's things more recent than that I liked, like Keanu. But, Keanu was somewhat aiming at a somewhat more specific, more black audience. So I'm thinking just like really, really countrywide.
And think about that timing. Like,
I don't see it back. But
so 2010, like if I remember right, broadband penetration in the US crosses 50%. I think in 2008, 2007 maybe. YouTube, I think, begins 2004, 2006 or something. I'm getting some of my dates mixed around, but to me that timing makes a lot of sense. That like. Being able to watch funny videos on demand anytime and having a lot of good content happens just about right before 2010. So if that's the reason why we don't see blockbuster comedies anymore, I think at least the timeline matches up.
Yeah, it's interesting how much of this is affected by sort of mundane changes in the techno-commercial environment and not so much the content itself. Sometime in the you said something about broadband penetration in the mid 2010s across a certain threshold. Yeah, people stopped being interested in getting the newest phone with the biggest screen to watch the coolest content that they've that they've seen the movies and would now like to watch portably. A lot of this happened because of just greater and more reliable connectivity, which made people want to just be glued to YouTube, because you really can just watch it for hours without fail. So, that wasn't as true maybe in 2011, 2012. But now even the worst phones can provide that for you.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe part of why we see this trend toward oligopolization as well. I think this might be one of the factors, which is now the barrier to entrance in all of these different forms of culture, in part driven by things like phones getting cheaper and internet penetrating more. The barriers are lower. So you can make a funny video, you can self-publish a book online, you can build a video game, you can release a song on YouTube and Spotify. You can, what's the only one? Making a TV show, maybe a little bit different, but now you can do all those things in your living room. And some of those people are really, really good at it. And so if you're a big studio who is going to spend a bunch of money to produce a movie or a book or a song or something like that, you don't want to compete with all these people who are giving away their labor for free and doing a pretty good job at it. So you might be thinking, what can we do that they could never do? And one answer to that question is, well, they can never make an Avengers movie because it takes $1 billion.
Yeah. They're focusing on what they do best.
Yeah.
Going big or going home. Yeah.
Yeah. They can't put Paul McCartney and Kanye West in the same room. Like they don't have the star power. They might be able to make a catchy song, but they don't have people who are as famous as us. So let's double down on what we do best as a way of surviving in an ecosystem that's now more competitive, because all of these people are willing to do all this stuff basically for free. I think might be another thing driving fewer people holding on to more of the top, because those are the only people who can survive when they are threatened with a bunch of people from the bottom.
Yeah. As far as in-theater experience, which is dominated by the people who can kind of corral the resources to make something like Avengers, there is a kind of niche that can kind of limp along for movies, say, from A24, outlet like that. It's funny, when I think of a combination of what you would do at home, either producing yourself for YouTube or viewing on YouTube, the combination of both that and being in the movie theater, it's Marcel the Shell with shoes on, little movies like that, which is that was like a YouTube thing for years. They finally turned it into a major motion picture, which is really just kind of an adorable YouTube looking thing on a big screen. They will sort of like the early mammals would sort of devour the carcasses of the things that dinosaurs left behind. That's not a very friendly way to put it, but like there's a place for them. I just don't think those movies are going to stick around in theaters for very long. They'll be, maybe 5 weeks, whereas Top Gun and whatever the next Avengers movie is will be in there for 2.5 months or something, 3 months.
Yeah, exactly. You, if it takes a lot of money to make something, you don't want to take the big risk. So why not make a movie out of a YouTube thing that is popular, and so it has brand recognition. Yeah. And so it's a sure bet that people are going to come and pay for it. And why not take the bigger risks in the smaller areas, which is why I think you do see lots of cool and interesting things, released under the radar on Spotify or YouTube or anywhere else. But for the ones that take a lot of money, this is also why I think part of driving the trend toward oligopolization is a retreating from taking big risks. Like nobody wants to blow $1 million at the box office. And so why do it if you don't have to take that risk? Yeah.
That writer, Ted Goya, has been making that point that, there's this kind of a death of culture that comes from, it's a pretty loaded way of putting it. And I don't think he harps on that particular phrasing all the time, but he has said that the death of culture comes from production studios and record labels not wanting to take chances, and they're more and more investing in older music catalogs in case of popular music. And here's an interesting factoid. I recall reading that the peak for money spent on music videos was in the late 90s. They were quite lavish, if you remember. There was these big videos for Puff Daddy, back then known as Puff Daddy, and Biggie Smalls, where they're like these fast boats out in Miami, and it looked like a Jerry Bruckheimer film or something. They were spending so much on music videos, and now for newer artists, even the big ones, you know, it clearly looks like they just did something in a warehouse somewhere, and then did a whole bunch of post production stuff. Yeah.
It sounds similar to
location as much.
Yeah. If you hear journalists writing about what it was like to be a journalist in the 90s or before, that it's just like these lavish lifestyles of like, oh yeah, we'll send you halfway across the world to write this story, because we know that if it's a big magazine feature, we're going to sell a bunch of magazines because that's what people buy. But that works in a world where there's only a handful of really big magazines. But now where you're faced with competition from anybody can put anything online, there's just not the margin in doing it anymore. And so I think that too is an invasion from below, that because now you have to compete with everybody, you compete differently. And it's funny, you don't get the same even though the sales concentrate at the top, like you don't get the same kind of lavishness and largesse as you did in these times when there was no competition to get to the top.
Yeah, I recall that movie 24-Hour Party People about Factory Records, and they would apparently at one point that label sent the band Happy Mondays to the Bahamas or to the Caribbean to make an album. And they basically just pissed it away on partying and stuff. But I mean, I just can't imagine, you know, them having that kind of privilege anymore, spending money in that way. So it was a kind of a weird, brief time period that, you know, people don't often think about the future. This will go away at some point.
Yeah. And it also seemed like a time where all the competition was to get into that lifestyle. And once you were there, you were good. So it was really feast or famine. And I don't know if this accurately, you know, describes everything across all facets of popular culture, but now it seems like, you know, you can with a moderately large following make a moderate amount of money on YouTube. But like you're not going to get rich unless you are in like the top 2% of creators or whatever.
Yeah, you will have a side hustle. I mean, you will be. You'll run into people. When you're shopping at you know, Trader Joe's or whatever. I'm just trying to think of the trendy spots in Silver Lake and, you know, whatever, LA. You know, people will recognize you. You'll get the adulation. You'll feel kind of like a rock star. But what they don't know is that you still have a job you do for 30 hours, or you're selling things on Etsy or whatever. You can't go without the side hustle now, and that's something Ted has also pointed out, that even, you know, really big stars who are making the charts, they can't forego endorsements and all of that stuff we used to consider sort of tacky and sort of selling out. And like the reason selling out as a concept is largely dead now is because, I mean, who can't do that? I mean, it's not even an option really. In the time of Nirvana, they, you know, like there were bands who wouldn't do that. So you actually could compare and contrast. Like this one's selling out, this one's not. It's like the idea of selling out is now so ingrained that it becomes a concept.
I read something interesting from the guy who wrote John Dies at the End. His name is David Wong. He was like, when you become even moderately popular on the internet, people just start to assume that like you are rich and powerful. And he used to be an editor at Cracked, and he was like, my first death threat came when I was I don't remember the detail exactly, but it was like he got his first death threat when he was still like a checkout guy at the supermarket, like making $8 an hour or whatever at the time. That someone was like, how dare you, fat cat, do that?
You know, but you don't deserve to be this successful. I hate you. Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I suppose in some way, speaking of psychology, getting back to the beginning of the talk, that might compensate for not actually being able to make a living. The fact that so many people think that you do, that you can. You know, you sort of like leave that myth of success.
Yeah, it's hard to eat fame, but it might keep you warm at night.
Yeah. Is there any sort of like big takeaway you would like to touch on?
Yeah, I think all the stuff that I've written about in terms of oligopoly and popular culture, I wrote a follow-up piece about how we see similar trends sort of everywhere. I mean, a lot of people know about income inequality and wealth inequality. Not a lot of people know about like the same trend toward oligopolization in like science, that more citations go to fewer of the papers.
Okay.
Or they might not think about how fewer of the newspapers get more of the readers. That's what happens when local news dies away. More people go to the Washington Post and New York Times. Or people might not think about how like the internet used to be kind of this weird place with a bunch of like small and medium sized websites, and now it's mainly a place with like a few gigantic websites.
Yeah, I just real quick. There's an article at the really excellent Palladium magazine talking about how the early internet boosters got it completely wrong as far as the internet decentralizing everything. It went completely the opposite direction. The article is called "The Internet Centralized Society." So I might link to that or maybe.
Yeah, because it turns out that when you give people additional tools, the people who are already the most powerful are the people who tend to use the tools, and that's not always true in all cases, right? That like, okay, now this person making videos in their living room like could eventually be a person who's making money on YouTube, and eventually they could even be like pretty famous. I mean, every day I do a Pilates video with a woman who has something like 10 million followers on YouTube, and she seems to be doing fine. Although I don't know, maybe she actually doesn't make any money. Who knows? But it seems like most of the time it's that you hand some people some tools, and it's like great. The people who already are at the top are going to use the tools to stay there or keep other people out. Or the people who are best at using the tools at the beginning are the ones that are going to stick around. And I think that's part of what happened with the internet. Is that Google figured out how to make a really good search engine. And now it's hard to imagine a world where you don't begin every experience on the internet by going to Google first.
Yeah, Google just is the internet essentially to a lot of people.
Yes. Yeah.
And but yeah, it's interesting how the pandemic. And I had a friend whose wife was doing kind of IRL yoga stuff in Sacramento, and the pandemic hit, and people just went online, and then they just stayed online. It's hard to get just come out physically. Even putting aside whatever fear of getting COVID, just the ease of just following this woman with 10 million followers. Now, there are, I can imagine there's always some number of people who actually do want to be able to speak personally with this person. I don't know, follow up after class. I have this cliche of like, can I speak to you after class? Went on. So they actually would benefit from and want kind of face-to-face interaction. So there's going to be some market for that. In the same way, I guess there's always going to be a market for Marcel the Shell with shoes on in a theater. But it's all been chipped away at.
Yeah, and if what you want is an experience where a bunch of people go there and they're there in person, then like that's kind of a thing that you you almost can't, like everybody has to opt into doing that. But like if what you want is, I want a workplace where we're all invested in being in the office, like you either have to do that top down or you kind of don't get it at all, because if you let people do whatever they want, then like everybody has 1 foot out and 1 foot in. And I don't know, that just seems like I don't know if we predicted that even in the height of the pandemic. I think we might have thought that like we are going to, once we can all go back, we're going to all go because we want to all go back. And a lot of people found that like, well, actually there's a lot of advantages to having 1 foot out and 1 foot in. And so now the people who want both feet in just don't get it.
Yeah, it's really weird how COVID was this big exogenous shock that actually prompted what the internet had been promising early on. You could do things from anywhere. And it took about 20 years for that finally to kick off, and it had nothing to do with the internet per se.
It turned out to be a coordination problem rather than a technological problem.
Exactly.
Yeah,
COVID for me, as far as the work arrangement, turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me. That's really, to a lot of people, that's a really shitty thing to say, because a lot of people lost their jobs. People working in 2020, people working in hospitality and live entertainment. They really got screwed. And I feel bad. I feel bad for them. I'm glad I don't. It wasn't doing that kind of work.
Yeah.
Well, in any case, yeah, Adam, thanks for talking.
Of course. Thank you. Thanks for reaching out.